Hi, I'm Dr. Erica Rushing. I'm a board-certified anatomic and dermatopathologist, and I teach first and second year medical students pathology. I am offering this short video so that you can get an idea as to my teaching style, because I will be offering more videos on my website, therushingreview.com. This particular video is on the rapid interpretation of arterial blood gases, or ABGs. I know this is a very difficult topic for some students, and this is a very quick video on how to rapidly interpret these arterial blood gases without having to think too closely about it. But before I do that, I'm going to mention that I am having an online pathology review course for students who are studying for Step 1 and COMLEX 1. The review course will be from May 8th to May 12th. It is a very intensive course. There will be a separate video offered on this YouTube channel so that you can see what that course will be like. So look for that. It is a limited enrollment. If you are studying for Step 1 or COMLEX 1 and you want to participate, I suggest that you enroll now, because once it fills, I do not know if I will be able to take more time off to offer another one later in May. I will certainly try if the demand is there. So I encourage you to go to the rushingreview.com website and sign up for that course if you are at that stage of medical school. So let's move on to the arterial blood gas. I know this is a really difficult topic, but if you know how to break it down, you can actually do this very, very quickly. But before we do that, let's talk about the basis for the arterial blood gas. It has to do with the pH and the bicarbonate, as well as carbon dioxide. The pH tells us if the patient has acidosis or alkalosis. So the important thing is to determine whether or not the pH is above 7.4 or below 7.4, because that's our magic number. If it's below 7.4, it's considered acidosis. If it's above 7.4, it's considered alkalosis. The normal pH range is 7.35 to 7.45, and those are numbers you have to memorize, because you have to be able to recognize whether or not a person is alkalotic or acidotic just from those numbers. Carbon dioxide is considered an acid, and its normal range is 35 to 45. And the way I remember that carbon dioxide's range is 35 to 45 is because it matches the pH. The 35 and the 45 go together. Anything to make it easier, that's my motto. Bicarb is considered a base. Its normal range is 22 to 26, and you must memorize these ranges because they're not necessarily going to give them to you, and you need them to recognize whether or not something is fully compensated, partially compensated, or uncompensated. So our body wants to stay in balance, and it will do everything it can to maintain a pH in a normal range for proper bodily function. As I mentioned before, PCO2 is an acid, and it is controlled by respiration. As we all know, we blow off carbon dioxide. So any pH that is controlled by the carbon dioxide is considered respiratory. Bicarb is considered a base, and it's controlled by the kidneys. And so anything where the bicarb is controlling the pH and driving the pH to go up or down is considered to be metabolic. So what's causing the pH change? Why is the pH going up or down, becoming alkalotic or acidotic? If I have too much carbon dioxide, then I'm going to become acidotic. So that would be a respiratory acidosis, and it would make the pH go down, because remember, a low pH is acidotic. If I have too much bicarb, then I would become more basic. So that would be a metabolic alkalosis, because the bicarb is driving the pH upward to an alkalotic state. But what people forget is that we also go the other way around. Whereas if I have too little carbon dioxide, where I don't have enough acid, it means that I have a lot more base than I do acid. And so I will become basic, I will become alkalotic, but it's because of a respiratory problem, so it would be a respiratory alkalosis. And the pH would be high because I don't have enough acid, I don't have enough of the carbon dioxide. Same is true for the bicarb. If I have too little bicarb, that's not enough base. So I have too much acid and it's not being counterbalanced by the base, and therefore I have a metabolic acidosis. Too much acid, but it's being driven because I don't have enough bicarb to balance it out. So whichever one is driving it, the other one tries to compensate, to try to level it all out. It's like a delicate balance. If I have too much base, my body is going to try to increase the acid to level them out. If I have too much acid, I will increase the base to try to level it out. It's an attempt to bring the pH back into the normal range by balancing amount of acid and base together. One more important item to note, and this really helps when you're trying to interpret these. If the pH goes down below 7.4 and it's caused by PCO2, by carbon dioxide, which is an acid, right? It means that the increased carbon dioxide, the increased CO2, causes the pH to go down. So they move in opposite directions. As I increase my carbon dioxide, my pH level drops. Carbon dioxide is an acid, pH dropping makes it acidotic. So it's important to remember that carbon dioxide moves in the opposite direction of the pH. So if I have a carbon dioxide that is increased, it is going to make the pH go down. It becomes acidotic. If my PCO2 goes down, meaning that I'm losing acid, I don't have a lot of acid, my pH is going to go up and the person's going to become more basic. For bicarb, that's not the way it works at all. Bicarb goes the same direction as the pH. So if my bicarb goes up, I become more basic and my pH goes up. If my bicarb goes down, because I don't have enough, my pH becomes more acidotic. So this is really helpful when you're trying to do a rapid interpretation of these arterial blood gases. If we understand that carbon dioxide moves in the opposite direction of the pH and bicarb moves in the same direction. So how to quickly evaluate an ABG. This slide is basically the most important thing you need to know. Everything before this was just kind of, hey, that's background. This is how you interpret it. First thing you look at, is it within a normal pH? Is the pH in the normal range? Is it between 7.35 and 7.45? If it is, that means it is fully compensated or it's perfectly normal and the person doesn't have any derangements at all. If it is not in the normal range, then it's either partially compensated or totally uncompensated. So when something is fully compensated, it means it has pulled it back into within the normal pH range. That makes it fully compensated. It did its job. The body totally compensated the way it was supposed to. And whatever happened, whether the bicarb went up and the PCO2 had to go up with it, whatever happened, it worked well enough that it's now put the pH back into the normal range. So that would make it fully compensated. If it's not in normal range, it's not fully compensated. It's either partially or totally uncompensated. It is completely uncompensated if the pH is abnormal and either the carbon dioxide or the bicarb are in their normal range, which is telling me that it's not compensating at all. It's not making up for the fact that the pH is now out of whack. The one that is abnormal determines whether or not it's metabolic, which would be bicarb, or if it's respiratory, which would be carbon dioxide. And don't worry, we're going to go through these so that you can understand what I'm talking about, because this may seem a little bit confusing right now. So it's completely uncompensated if one of the values is within normal range and the other one isn't. That's basically what that's saying. If the PaCO2, if the carbon dioxide is abnormal, is it going in the same direction as the pH or not? If it is going in the same direction as the pH, it means it's a metabolic cause. And if it's not going in the same direction, it's a respiratory cause, because we just said that CO2 moves in the opposite direction of the pH. If the CO2 goes up, the pH is going to go down and a person's going to become acidotic. We just said that. So if that's happening and they're going in opposite directions, it means it's a respiratory cause of my pH problem. And we'll take a look at this again as we go through examples. And then the last thing is it above 7.4 or below 7.4? Because that's telling me if it's alkalotic or acidotic. So let's do some examples. So if I have a pH of 7.11, 7.11, and a PaCO2 of 42, and a bicarb of 15, the first thing I can do is I can take a look and say, okay, my pH is below 7.4, so I am acidotic. Then the question is, what are these values? Is the PaCO2 within normal range? Yes, it is, right? 35 to 45. This is within normal range. This one, however, is really low. So the fact that this is normal and this one's out of whack tells me that this one right here, the bicarb, is the reason for this pH being so low. So that tells me it is a metabolic acidosis. Now the question is it compensated or not, or partially compensated? This is within the normal range, which means that my body isn't doing what it's supposed to do to try to balance this bicarb out. The bicarb has driven the pH totally out of whack, and the CO2 isn't doing its job. It isn't trying to balance it out because it's still within normal range. So that tells me it's completely uncompensated metabolic acidosis. Make sense? Let's try another one. Sorry, 7.14, a PaCO2 of 23, and a bicarb of 19. 7.14 tells me that I am acidotic. I am below 7.4. PaCO2 is 23, and the bicarb is 19. Both of these are not in normal range, right? So they're both out of whack. But the question is, which one is driving this? Is the CO2 going in the same direction as the pH or not? Remember, PCO2 normal level is between 35 and 45. If it were the CO2 that were driving it, it would go in the opposite direction of the pH. Remember, as I get more CO2, I become more acidotic, and they go in opposite directions. But that's not what's happening here. What's happening here is that I am acidotic, but my CO2 is dropping, so it's going in the same direction of the pH. That tells me this is a metabolic acidosis. It's not respiratory. The CO2 is not driving this lower pH. It's the bicarb that's driving it. But my CO2 is not in normal range. So that means that my body's trying to compensate, but it's not working because my pH is still out of normal range. So this would be a partially compensated metabolic acidosis. Let's try one more. 7.71 is my pH, PaCO2 of 38, and my bicarb is 31. So 7.71, that's alkalosis, right? PaCO2 is a 38. That is within normal range for carbon dioxide. My HCO3 is 31. That is out of normal range. So when we look at this, I have an alkalosis. My bicarb is too high, but my CO2 is within normal range. So the fact that the CO2 is within normal range tells me that whatever's going on is uncompensated, because the CO2 should not be normal. It should be trying to balance out the bicarb. And the bicarb is the reason for this pH being elevated, because it's out of whack. It's the one value that's out of whack, and the CO2 isn't. So this would be a completely uncompensated metabolic alkalosis, because it's the bicarb that's driving the alkalosis, and the carbon dioxide has not caught up with it. The carbon dioxide is still within normal range, so it is not compensated at all, and my pH is still abnormal. So now I'm going to show you some other ones and ask you to figure out what they are. And I'm going to give you a couple minutes to sit down and figure out if you can determine what these are. Are they uncompensated, partially compensated, or fully compensated? And then we'll talk about whether or not they're metabolic or respiratory acidosis or alkalosis. So I ask you not to breeze right through this video and try to get to the answers right away. You don't gain anything from that. What you want to do is sit down and figure it out yourself and see if you can get to the right answer. So let's start going through these one at a time. And you can still go through them if you haven't finished them yet. I realize I haven't given you a whole lot of time. Let's do the next one, 7.5. 7.5 is above 7.4, so that makes it an alkalosis. The PaCO2 is 49. That is elevated, that's high. And the bicarb is also high. So how do I know which one it is? Well, the PaCO2 is moving in the same direction as the pH. So that tells me that it's not respiratory, that it's metabolic. So it's a metabolic alkalosis that is partially compensated because the CO2 is not in normal range. And the pH is still outside of normal range, so it's not totally compensated. So that one would be a partially compensated metabolic alkalosis. Let's go on to the next one, 7.24, 39 carbon dioxide and 13 bicarb. 7.24 would be considered an acidosis. PaCO2 is within normal range. It's between 35 and 45, but the bicarb is really low at 13. So the fact that the CO2 is within normal range and the bicarb isn't is telling me the bicarb is responsible for this whole thing. So it would be a metabolic acidosis, and it is uncompensated because the CO2 is still within normal range. So it's an uncompensated metabolic acidosis. 7.43. Now this one's interesting because this pH is within normal range. If I look at the PaCO2 though, remember PaCO2 should be between 35 and 45. It's not, it's low. And the bicarb is 18. It is also low. So 7.43, even though it's still within normal range, it is above 7.4. So that means this is an alkalosis, right? So the pH is a little bit higher than it should be. And the question is the CO2 moving in the same direction or a different direction than the pH? And in this case, the PaCO2 is moving in the opposite direction. The PaCO2 is going down. It's down to 28 from 35 to 45. And the pH was going up at 7.43. So that tells me this is respiratory. They're moving in opposite directions. Even though the 7.43 is still within normal range, it is above 7.4. So this is an alkalosis, and it's a respiratory alkalosis. This bicarb is 18, but actually that tells me that the bicarb is compensating. And because the pH is within normal range, the compensation has worked. So this is a fully compensated respiratory alkalosis because the pH is within normal range. Let's look at the next one, 7.37. Am I between 7.35 and 7.45? Yes, I am. So my pH is within normal range. The 7.37, though, is an acidosis. It is below 7.4. So it's an acidosis, but my pH is within normal range. If I look at my carbon dioxide, it's at 33. Is that high or low or normal? It's not within normal range. It's just below the normal range at 33. Remember, it's 33 to 35 to 45 is normal range. So my PaCO2 is low. My pH is low, but within normal range. So they're both moving in the same direction, which tells me it's a metabolic acidosis. Remember, they go in opposite directions if it's respiratory. So the PaCO2 is low, the pH is slightly low, still within normal range, but still acidotic. And then the bicarb is 17, also abnormal. So this is telling me that I have a metabolic acidosis. And since my pH is within normal, it is a fully compensated metabolic acidosis, because basically the carbon dioxide compensated enough that it has pulled the pH back up to within normal range. But it's the bicarb that has driven the pH to basically be lower and acidotic. The next one, 7.35, also acidotic, just on the edge of being outside of the normal range. It's 7.35, still considered in the normal range though, but it's still acidotic. It's below 7.4. The PaCO2 is a 53. That's high. So again, we've got that situation. My CO2 is going up, my pH is going down. So that tells me this is respiratory. I have a respiratory acidosis going on. The bicarb is trying to compensate, and it has compensated enough to bring the pH back up into the normal range. So it is a fully compensated respiratory acidosis. All right, last two. 7.83, CO2 of 31, and a bicarb of 26. Well, 7.83 is definitely alkalotic. The question is, the CO2, though, is low. It should be 35 to 45. So the CO2 is going down, the pH is going up. They're moving in opposite directions. So that tells me respiratory is causing this, right? So I have a respiratory alkalosis. And because the pH is not within normal range, it is not compensated. And look at the bicarb. It's 26. So technically, the bicarb is within normal range. It's not compensating at all for this really high pH. So that would be an uncompensated respiratory alkalosis, because it's the PaCO2 which is driving this, and the bicarb is still within normal limits. So that tells me it's totally uncompensated, and obviously the pH is way out of whack, and it's all because of the CO2. The CO2 is going down and the pH is going up. The last one, 7.34, just outside of normal, 7.35 to 7.45. It's an acidosis. It's below 7.4. PaCO2 is 46. Well, we said that normal is 35 to 45, so this is outside of normal, and it is going up while the pH is going down, which tells me it's a respiratory cause, right? They're moving in opposite directions. The bicarb is abnormal, right? It's 32. That's high for bicarb. So I've already determined that it's a respiratory acidosis. The question is it compensated? No, it's not compensated, because my pH is not within normal limits. It's at 7.34 and normal would be 7.35. So this would be a partially compensated respiratory acidosis. So interesting exercise, easy way to get through the ABGs. Again, we just go back to systematically go through it, look at the pH. Is it acidotic? Is it alkalotic? What is the carbon dioxide doing? Is it going in the same direction or the different direction than the pH? And is the other value totally normal, which means I'm totally uncompensated? Or is it abnormal, and has it brought the pH back into within normal range, telling me that I'm fully compensated? And if not, then I'm only partially compensated. So this was just a short video on how to interpret ABGs. And again, if you're interested in the course on pathology, a 1-week intensive course, you can find that registration at rushingreview.com. Thanks so much.